it was really a remarkable journey, and it really gave me and my team and everyone involved,
Mhm.
you taught us how to gather requirements very thoroughly, very
Mhm.
detailed. Usually such projects start with everyone nice, everyone competent, we can do that, let's sign a contract, let's go. But
Yeah.
your approach was a bit different. So you see, nobody did realize the scope in the very early stages. What do we have to do to get it done? And there were not many people who even could imagine how big this task would be.
So Marius, you're from Cgates, and Cgates in Lithuania. I believe you started a migration journey with PortaOne way back when in 2019. So just to give a bit of context, and 6 years later, you're still migrating. So the
Ro-
question here would be, what made you decide early on that getting the migration right was more important than doing it fast? Was there a specific moment to choose that sort of gradual approach?
Well, there are many things to include into my story, but the main thing is that, I somehow, me and my team, of course, it wasn't me alone, but we somehow managed to, prove to people, to stakeholders, and the investment committee as well, that it's worth doing step by step, because one big bang, which was considered as an option as well, might cause problems. And this is due to specific of our services,
Hmm.
and due to specific of how we provide the service to customer.
Hmm.
Because it's your fixed network provider. It's not mobile. It's not a SIM card which is activated and just reconnects to cell towers, and that's it. There is a physical connection. There are optic cables and LAN cables and everything, and that needs to be managed properly, because once you get the switch fully um, loaded, that's it. You cannot add anything extra without a physical contact to
Hmm.
that. So the migration as such had to be performed in a step by step, like one territory at a time, or one city, let's say the bigger one, and so on. We had to plan that.
Hmm.
And the duration of all the projects, it sounds really scary to someone. 6 years of migration, 6 years of project preparation, development, testing, and so on and so on. Yeah, it sounds scary, but you see, the migration itself, in fact, it took only uh, 6 months.
Right.
20,
Interesting. Yeah.
2025 was the year of the real migration. Before that, we only had test migrations. One half customer, 20 customers, 30 customers, and all of that was to a separate environment, the test environment. But the
Hmm.
migration itself,
Hmm.
it was, with your team, it was performed flawlessly in 6 months. So everything else was a preparation, was testing, was adapting to unforeseen, some challenges, and et cetera, et cetera. So the approach that we have discussed many times in management, in team, in many teams involved, we had a project team, we had a commercial team, we had a customer service team, we had IT team, and uh, everyone was believing that the step-by-step migration
Hmm.
is, in our case, is a much safer choice than going all at once and then later on solving the problems,
Right.
which definitely do appear.
Yeah. And I suppose it shows how important that planning stage is, right? To get that right.
Yes, of course, the planning. You see, the initial idea was, when I joined the company,
But
there were plans to, change the systems, migrate to new systems,
Mhm.
to, bigger capacity, etc., etc., scalability, redundancy, everything. Those nice words have sounded
Mhm.
before me joining the
Of course.
company.
Mhm.
But the idea behind it is that we decided to go step by step when
Mhm.
we saw the scope.
Yes.
Initial idea, I was invited to this company by the CEO back
Mhm.
then. He told me one sentence: Marius, come join us and let's migrate billing. Okay, sure. But at the end, after 6 years, we have 12 systems,
Mhm.
12 systems, which changed our big unsupported monolith that existed before and which is still running, by the way. And we'll talk about that later,
Yeah.
of course. So you see, nobody did realize the scope in the
Mhm.
very early stages. What do we have to do to get it done? And there were not many people who even could imagine how big this task would be. And as soon as it started appearing, out of shadows, out of, dark corners, that this is a much bigger animal than we thought it will be, well,
Yeah.
then the accurate and really thorough planning, well, it was unavoidable. We had
Yeah.
to do that.
And with that planning, at the very, very first stage, we did a so-called, or what we call a discovery phase of about 3 weeks before we started the project together. And from our point of view, we always highlight that to customers doing complex migrations, how important it is to do this sort of crucial step. Um, and how did you sort of feel about this discovery or business analysis phase, and how does it shape the project? Were there any major requirements that you didn't know until we did the discovery, or what did get added to the scope?
I recall that session. Your colleague was here in Lithuania. We invited her. She joined us day by day. We sat in this very meeting room for many hours and we discussed what do we have in system, what do we would like to have, why we migrate, what's the idea, what's what's the in the basket, the products, the setup, the systems that will have to be integrated, and
Yeah.
everything. And I myself, I think this was a very high quality time spent together. Really,
Hmm.
it really helped us. It was a good kickoff.
Hmm.
Though because of the scope, which I already mentioned, and we didn't even realize how much there will be,
Yeah.
some things were touched, not quite properly, or maybe just, not deep enough for the initial phase, or some things might have been forgotten or described in incorrect words, phrasing, and so on. So we
Mhm.
really did miss some important stuff, which
Mhm.
later on we found out, and we had many sessions to sort it out with your team, and yeah, that happened.
Yeah.
But
Um,
well, the initial the answer itself, the initial business analysis, yeah, it
mhm.
was really good. It was really good thing to start with because we were introduced what the system has by default, what's out of scope, and so on and so on. We could imagine what to expect. Usually such projects start with everyone nice, everyone competent. We can do that. We can do that. Let's sign a contract. Let's go. But
Yeah.
your approach was a bit different. It was really technical, really detailed, and yeah,
And
yeah.
of
Please.
course, the business analysis is oftentimes at a stage where you, as a new customer of ours, doesn't quite yet know the project and maybe the naming convention and so on. And I believe the discovery phase oftentimes helps with that as well, to bring everybody on the same page.
Definitely, yes, it does.
I heard from our project team that there were actually some acquisitions that Cgates did during that time of the migration, and you acquired other CSPs and brought them into the fold. And then, I mean, that's oftentimes something that can easily kill a migration project. Can you walk us through what was it like for you? to acquire another ISP during the migration? And did you get those customers into your old billing system first, or did you put them straight into Porta billing? How did that work?
Well, there were a few different cases, but in general, next to our two
Mhm.
billings, we had a third billing running
Right.
until we were ready with PortaOne.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was quite a challenging um, thing to do. But when you run two,
Mhm.
adding third adds complexity because you have different interface. You have PBX issues because someone is calling and then he's not in the first billing, he's not in the
Right.
second, but then he's in the third. Okay, let's do a quick lookup and everything. So those uh, daily issues, but in general, of course, it added complexity to project because when you acquire some business, the big business like we had bought a network in a city with
Okay.
2000 something customers. Their
Uh-huh.
approach was that if customer wants something, they usually do deliver, and there were many like 2000 customers, 2000 versions of price plans, let's say. So well, of course, I'm making it
Yeah.
sound much complicated than it is, but
Yeah.
that's similar to that.
Yeah.
So we had to prepare PortaOne because we knew that we will migrate, but
Mhm.
at the same time we tried to simplify that because we had commitments in PortaOne. So we prepared the data and the customers, we were informing them. We prepared their price plans, the financial history and everything to be
Mhm.
migrated to PortaOne after we finished migration from our old billing. So it was like additional ETLs to
Right.
achieve what we need, but we already had huge experience because it was
Mhm.
fifth year of the project with your team. Oleg, your colleague, he was working with the migration mostly, and our guys were working together with him. So they shared this experience. So we had a good preparation from migration perspective because we tried that, I don't know, 40 times, 45 times, maybe 50 times we tried migrating. So we
Mhm.
knew what to expect on the destination system. And
Mhm.
the issue itself was, isolated on the extracting data from the old system. So
Right.
we managed that well because we
Mhm.
already were prepared with your team about the destination system, and the source was the only challenge. But yeah, it added complexity not only for us, for
Yeah.
everyone in the company.
Mhm.
So,
And I think you
but
already touched on the other teams, obviously, in your company in Cgates. How did the journey of having two billing systems at a time for such an extended period of time, how did that work for sales or support teams that weren't involved with the migration? How did you sort of prepare the other parts of the company to handle that sort of situation? Because just in terms of context, oftentimes when I talk to folks, they always try to minimize, obviously, that time where you have two systems running at the same time, because it's potentially confusing. How did operations
well,
handle that?
it wasn't easy as well, but um, I should be honest and well admit that when we started the project in 2019,
Hmm.
it was the project team that was messing with the new systems there, the porta billing, the CRM, the new uh, invoice generation system, and so on and so on, new payment gateways and all that stuff
Hmm.
until 2023 in April. That's the moment when we launched new customers to new setup, the porta billing and CRM and everything. So it was almost 4 years of new system and the project our own
Yeah,
thing to work with. The company didn't feel any
I
changes
see.
until that moment. So
I see.
in 2023 they only started working with two systems,
Hmm.
and here we started experiencing some problems because you have two systems. Okay, you manage the customer, service part, because, for example, if customer is calling the contact number, it's in
Mhm.
the new system. PBX does the search and opens the screen. On the screen, it opens the new billing, the new
Right.
CRM.
Yeah.
If this customer with his contact is in all billing, so PBX opens that. So
I
we
see.
applied such small but smart things to make it easier for them.
Mhm.
As about the invoices, for example, so customer calls
Mhm.
and says, I paid, but I'm still, I have my service limited. We introduced some workarounds in customer self-care portal, because you can impersonate as a customer service representative. You
Yeah.
can open the customer self-care portal and you can see everything from customer's perspective. So
Mhm.
it doesn't matter which system the invoice comes from. It doesn't
Okay.
matter which system had the payment allocated. It's all there. So
Mhm.
we introduced again some magic workaround, but
Mhm.
it helped a lot.
Yeah.
It's not easy. Of course, you have double the processes. You have double reporting, which is really the big pain.
Yeah.
Consolidate them into one financial report, especially when you're closing the financial year. Jesus, that was really a challenge. But
I
yeah,
imagine.
we did that, and now, well, there was a moment in our project when we just switched from old system to new,
Mhm.
when 50%, 51% of customers were already migrated. So
Mhm.
uh, one system became the main system, another system became the secondary. So
Right.
that happened last year in, I guess it was April, or yeah, April. Yeah. So
Okay.
that's how we did it. Of course, it was really difficult, but we introduced workarounds.
You just take and take it step by step, right? So,
Yes.
to give viewers a bit of a context or background, so Cgates offers triple play services. So you offer internet, IPTV, voice over IP, and I imagine a few other services as well. So that obviously brings a lot of different systems that a billing system will need to be interacting with. What did you find? So there's a different service delivery systems, provisioning systems, TV platforms, CRMs, and so on. What did you find the hardest part? Was there a single system that just was very difficult to cooperate, or how did you solve that?
This needs a bit of wider explanation here. And you see, the idea how we started the project in 2019, we were escaping the monolith architecture.
Right.
Yeah, we thought, okay, microservices is something that we should look at. And when we started deciding how do we do that, the
Mm-hmm.
main idea, my idea and my team's idea, was that we don't have a double purpose systems in the setup. If
Mm-hmm.
it's billing, it's doing billing. If it's making sure that you are charged for what you bought, and it's
Mm-hmm.
making sure that you get the service that you pay for. So
Yeah.
billing is doing the billing, it's collecting payments, and it's provisioning the service that was bought and is now activated. So billing does the billing and provisioning. CRM does, well, CRMing. The
Right.
document
Mm-hmm.
archive does, archiving the documents, and so on and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And the main idea was that we don't duplicate the purpose of the system. For example, if there are some billing functions that cannot be done in PortaOne, how do we do it? We go to Porta team, we ask them, can we do that? How long will it take? Feature request and so on,
Yeah.
DRSs and all that stuff. And we plan it that way, that we do not move the calculation of charges to any other system. So
Yeah.
with that idea in mind, we started building up this setup, and the that was quite easy, because if we decided that PortaOne is responsible for TV service provisioning, That's
Mhm.
how the aliases were introduced in Porta Billing, the services that make sure that you get provisioned to correct system,
Yeah.
because that's the service you bought. So there's no other system doing the same. So
Mhm.
it was quite straightforward. If there was a mistake, we knew where to look for it. So
Right.
this approach really, worked for itself.
Mhm.
And Porta became responsible for every provisioning that, then you said triple, but there are a bit more than that.
Yes.
There are few TV services, not one. There are a few technologies in like DVB-C, digital, and IPTV, as you mentioned, and all that stuff. So, you know, we made sure that there's one point of action.
Mhm.
The purpose of the system is
Uh-huh.
only there. So it made it quite easy, but there were some things that we had to
Mhm.
adapt to, because some of the
Yes.
systems were older. Some, they do not operate via APIs. They need the files loaded in a proper order,
Uh-huh.
and in frequency, all that stuff. So yes, it added some additional challenges and some tasks, but we worked it out with
Yeah.
your business analysts. We found solutions. We tested them. We talked about many approaches. Some
Mm.
experiments, were thrown away.
Yeah.
No, R&D.
Yeah. Excellent. And what it sounds to me like what contributed to the success was actually a very strong vision of what life at the end would be like, or from your end that you had. Because that we always find that sometimes it's challenging for our business analysts to work if the customer doesn't know what they want, and it sounds like in your case this wasn't the case.
You see, the vision was changed many times as the scope was discovered. So, but yeah, we knew that from the very
Yeah.
beginning. We knew that we want a system
Hmm.
which which can be redundant, because
Hmm.
before we had a monolith. If database experienced a deadlock, that's it. Customer care cannot do the
Yeah.
tasks. Force field, the field force, right? They cannot do their tasks, approach some outages in the network, and so on and so on. So we decided to make the system redundant, and if one part fails, other parts keep functioning. So yeah, that vision was there since the very beginning, and
Hmm.
we were holding on it, and we almost achieved it. Of course, there are some things, some compromises had to be done, and some functions are moved from one system to another, but still the let's say 92-95% of the initial idea from this perspective, it's still there. So yeah, it helped us a lot. We knew what we want from the systems, but
Hmm.
then all the changes came from the teams that joined the project. So yeah,
Yeah.
but that's a
Interesting.
different story already. Yeah.
Maybe for part two. Um, I understand that Cgates, as a large ISP in Lithuania, is under the Lithuanian government's oversight for critical infrastructure.
Yep.
What was sort of the impact of those security and compliance requirements on the project? Did it change in any way how you had to do things, or?
Not really. We always were there. And
Mhm.
as soon as I joined the company, first thing we got was ultimatum from from the government that, look,
Right.
guys, you do not respond to our requirements. You do not respond to our mails. What the
Yeah.
heck is going on?
Yeah.
And that's where we started, by the way. This was the thing to start with, even before finding PortaOne or any other partner as a participant of the project. So it was there since the very beginning. So it
Hmm.
did not impact much on the project itself.
Hmm.
Of course, we had some strange requirements which sounded strange. For example, to your team, that
Hmm.
web GUI cannot store the username and password. This was one of the requirements which
Right.
you had to develop for us. So it added some scope, but there was nothing, like groundbreaking.
Yeah. Well, that's
So
that's good to hear.
that's routine stuff that we are used to, and then you handled it as well. So
Mhm. There's a couple more things that I want to touch on. So by October 2025, you migrated about 98% of your 131,000 customers from the old system. And I understand the remaining 2.5% or so are handled very carefully because there are some specific requirements. So if there was another ISP globally with over 100,000 subscribers and they asked you for one piece of advice, is there something that you wish you would have known when you started the project, or what advice would you give to that ISP?
well, you know,
Difficult
if
question.
someone,
I
yeah,
understand.
that's a tough one. There are many advices that I have now for myself.
Mhm.
Looking at me younger, six
Yeah.
years younger. Yeah, but the thing is that um, whatever scope you have, whatever whatever challenging setup you have,
Hmm.
it's always the 80/20 proportions.
Yeah.
80% of your database, of your products, of your features and everything is migrated in 20% of time, and
Hmm.
vice versa.
Yeah.
So do the easy stuff first,
Hmm.
aim for the complicated stuff in parallel, but then focus on it as soon as you have you know some free time after. That's what we did, and
Hmm.
now we can handle those 2.5% in old system before migrating them to new system much easier, because you don't have to perform that many tasks to
Right.
keep them alive, let's say, in the old system. So
Hmm.
yeah, clean up the easy stuff and
Hmm.
then aim for the complicated, because if you start aligning everything for 100%, you'll
Hmm.
never reach any percent, because you will still be
Right.
improving, fixing that,
Yeah.
finding that, and so on and so on and so on. that
Mm.
that way we would have never started the migration if
Mhm.
we aimed for those 2.5%. So corner cases last. That's
Yeah.
what worked out for me. If someone would ask, with 1,000, 100,000 customers would ask me for advice now, I would
Mhm.
say, slice your database, slice your, object of migration
Yep.
into, some really easy describable
Mhm.
pieces, like homogenic ones. Why this group is such a group, and then plan their
Right.
migration, leaving the complicated part for the end of the project,
Mhm.
because other way you would never start. We made
Yeah.
that mistake in the very beginning, not
Mhm.
from the migration perspective, but from the functionalities in the system perspective.
I
We
see.
wanted to get everything done
Mhm.
before the launch, and then only then migrate when we are fully prepared with the all the invoicing processes, all the customer care processes, and etc. But we saw that we are not moving anywhere fast enough. So yeah, let's launch the new customers in 2023.
Mhm.
Okay, we did that, and we saw that system itself, it's there, it's up and running. So
Yeah.
now we can finally migrate. If we were waiting for the perfect solution,
Yeah.
perfect state of the system, I think today we would still be planning the migration.
Right. Interesting.
So,
Very good advice, I believe. And then, so what's next for Cgates? Once you migrated everybody, and I suppose you'll switch off the old system. Are there any capabilities you've been waiting to unlock, or any new services you're looking to launch, or what's next for Cgates?
well, we still playing the old music.
Yeah.
We are buying smaller networks throughout the country, so there are a few acquisitions. and one is happening. The migration of that small acquisition is happening right now. Yesterday, we performed it successfully with your team. So that's what we know how to do, and we will keep on doing that.
Yeah.
That's one thing. From the some functionalities and some new stuff. Of course, the market itself requires to react to someone else. It's now all about apps. It's now
Hmm.
all about multiple screens and all the session handling and all that stuff. If you bought something, you bought additional screen, for example, you have an iPad and then your child has an iPad, he wants to you,
Right.
watch his VOD.
Yeah.
Then there's another session. Okay, we automatically charge it, and so on and so on. So all that stuff, the many automated processes is the least possible handwork
Mhm.
in our daily life. So
Yeah.
that's one thing that we will aim for after the migration, the final migration from the old system.
Mhm.
And that's July, August this year. Can't wait.
And then I suppose celebrate.
Oh yes, I won't be here from full July.
Very good, Marius. I really, really appreciate you taking the time, and I really enjoyed our little chat. And thank you so much. Very much appreciate it. And yeah, I
Well,
hope you enjoy
okay,
the
yeah, I enjoyed sharing my experience with you. It was really a remarkable journey, and it really gave me and my team and everyone involved.
Mhm.
You taught us how to gather requirements very thoroughly, very
Mhm.
detailed, and whenever we had some problems in inside the company for understanding what our business needs, we were always saying, look how Porta does it.
Mm.
They gather the requirements, they write it down, they send it to you for verification, we both approve, and then Porta gets to work. So
Yes.
that's a very good example that we reused in our daily life. So it was you know it was a pleasure working with you and now sharing experience as well. So yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Enjoy your evening.